there's this thing called the cloud, which connects us to each other and to all the services that we need, but nobody actually knows often what that means, or actually what is the cloud, and what lies behind the interfaces that we use in order to access the cloud. So generally speaking, our work usually deals with the internet and deconstructing what these concepts are and how they work, just so that people feel like they have some kind of insight into what they're a part of.
What is software-defined radio? What is
how to run your own web server?
How to self-host and run a web server, and like stuff like this. This like building blocks of today's network technology, and together with that, of course, comes the question of infrastructure and how this information is being like distributed or disseminated, sent over the ocean. And that is also a very important part in our work, because again, the further we go, the more technopolitically important the part of the infrastructure becomes.
Right. So what led us to the project that we came to Ludmila to execute, which we called LANscapes, it sits within the logical flow of our work, but was also a bit of a departure for us in that we wanted this to be a more experimental research project. Normally the work that we do seems to have a very focused outcome, but for our residency here, we wanted to actually experiment not with how people experience being online, which is what our work is normally doing, but actually experiment with the infrastructure itself and how network infrastructure exists within environments.
But like my curiosity in this project lies in how the technology can adapt to nature versus how the nature can adapt to technology, and should we choose to use less bandwidth for that bandwidth is being allocated between two trees, for instance, how would we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, basically rethinking network infrastructure that respects the environment that we're in, that's designed specifically for the environments that we find ourselves in, and that is neither just placed on top of the environment, nor is completely hidden, which again, as I said, is deceptive, but some sort of middle ground, like creating infrastructure that is respectful for the environment that it's in, while also being respectful of, I mean, if you can think of it that way, of people who participate in it by not hiding it, not obfuscating it for, being transparent without being hostile. What is network infrastructure? I mean, it's broadly defined as being composed of signal paths, antennas, data centers, routers, and waveguides. And so for this installment of our research, we began with antennas. So what we specifically did experimented with for this residency was building experimental antennas, which is both an antenna designed to live inside of a tree, or not inside of, but with a tree, and then a set of antennas whose form was inspired by the organic forms found in, grass, reeds, something flexible which holds its shape, but also defines the volume that radio waves are occupying.
And also its movement. Yeah. I find, like, after playing around with it yesterday myself, I was like thinking about, how the wind blows the reeds, and how it is, and then you could modulate some type of information through wind, and make the wind move these antennas, and like by that modulate the signal and sound like a Morse code or something, and like this type of thinking, which is not very common for me, or like I have not been thinking about such things before, are actually quite inspiring. It's like a new domain of thinking about telecommunications when you start to involve the nature, thinking like what can we gain from already existing stuff, we are harvesting energy from wind, for instance, but can we use wind for, sending information over? Or when we were here in Tivoli Park, thinking about our stuff, we saw these water drains that go down, and I was like, wow, actually it would be amazing to run water down and like modulate and try to receive on the other end, would that work? and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it does open up questions considering new kinds of protocols, for example, that could be developed.
One of the first ideas was, what if we turn a tree branch into an antenna, because it like already kind of looks like an antenna. And at first we thought maybe the branch itself can resonate, but it's just physically not so feasible or possible. And the next thought was what if we insert an active element of the antenna onto the branch and then add the passive elements like the reflectors and what are they called?
Directors.
Directors, right, onto the antenna, and then just see with this very simple spectrum analyzer if the antenna is anywhere effective. So basically we replace like an actual antenna with a plant antenna, and just see if we get any type of reception. And yeah, again, the experiment is not practical. It's not like, oh, do we get like, can we shoot further, or do we get more this or that with it? It's more about just seeing if it works at all, right. I guess, right?
It makes sense to want to create a system that's efficient, but does it have to be for serving this unending purpose of productivity, you know? The capitalist systems we find ourselves in are optimized for productivity and profitability. And, you know, especially myself growing up in the States, I mean, that's sort of like indoctrinated in me. But I think it's useful to consider other ends. I mean, there's more to achieve than productivity. So we have transmitters on the ground, AM transmitters. And so what's being created here is a field of AM frequencies all transmitting on approximately the same frequency being picked up by the radios. And these antennas, well, these are in fact antennas connected to the transmitters. So, I mean, this piece is basically about, well, there's a couple aspects to it. One is the actual form of the antennas, which are inspired by Yagi and antenna designs, but also attached to these soft, flexible stems, which enables them to sort of freely move within the space. You know, it's also about the fact that obviously we can't see radio waves. We can't experience them with our senses normally. Of course, we can hear them like we are now, but it's also about sort of helping us sense maybe the volume that the radio waves might occupy. You know, it's giving a physicality basically to the energy which surrounds us. When communications protocols were being developed, I mean, it was a very utilitarian purpose, which makes sense. But, you know, we've come to a point where, you know, I think we've developed telecommunications to a point where it serves us well for the purpose of getting information transmitted across long distances. It's become more than that. I mean, it's no longer just about that. It's also, I mean, it's about money really these days. It's about data harvesting, it's about surveillance, it's about, I mean, in a way, like the internet, which started out as like the great, I mean, which I recall clearly was like a Wild West where you could meet all kinds of characters, and it felt like this free and open space where like anyone could connect with anyone else. I mean, it's kind of become a reductive medium now, in part also to social media. It's sort of had this homogenizing effect on culture. And
global economy.
And global economy. I feel like what started out as a free and open medium has become somewhat restrictive, at least in its cultural effect. And I think it's reached a point where it's appropriate to start to consider alternatives and to freely experiment, no matter how outlandish the experiments might seem. I mean, that's sometimes where you have to look to find new approaches.